It's Tuesday, April 12th. Thanks for choosing Real Talk today with your valuable time. We know that you got to pick and choose how you spend your time, how you invest your time, and it always means a lot when it means that Real Talk is part of your daily routine. Whether you're walking the dog, driving home, maybe you're tuning in live on this Tuesday morning. We appreciate you being here. Very excited for the show today. David Knight Legg will join us in about 5 minutes' time. Former principal advisor to Alberta's Premier Jason Kenney. He was the founding CEO of Invest Alberta Corporation. You may have seen him recently. He wrote for the Wall Street Journal a piece just a few days ago on Vladimir Putin's energy impetus and the energy implications of this war in Ukraine right now. If you're like me, which I imagine you are, you're seeing this story unfold as Mariupol, the city seems to teeter precariously. It seems inevitable that it'll fall into Russian hands, and the implications of this, the death toll, the civilian death toll in the thousands. I'm watching international news coverage last night, trying to wrap my mind around it, and we make a commitment here on this show that we'll explore as many angles as we possibly can to help you, to help me, to help us understand what's going on, what's driving it. How might this war end? And an interesting angle to come, I'm sure, from David Knight Legg. And then in about a half hour's time, we call him the Titan of Talk. He has been an institution in Canadian media. He spent some time working down in the States as well. As a matter of fact, won an Emmy, did Charles Adler, a short time ago, several months ago. The timing of this interview is not an accident. There was a period of time where he could not grant interviews. It's how it works in media. But Adler left his nationally syndicated talk radio show, Charles Adler Tonight, and today he grants his first interview back on the record since he left the AM dial.
I can't wait for this. I've been a long-time fan of Charles, and just seeing him and behind the scenes here, getting him set up for today, I'm super excited.
Yeah, he's got an RTDNA that's like the radio and television. I mean, if you're in Canada, if you're working in journalism, talk radio, TV news in Canada, an RTDNA Lifetime Achievement Award is a huge deal. And a few years ago, Charles was bestowed with that honor, and I'm really excited to check in with him. He's basically been, for the past number of years, my career mentor. And he's incredibly generous with his perspective and his advice and the time that he invests in people he cares about. And I think that that's a big reason why Canadians have felt such a connection to Charles for so many years. And this is going to be a great conversation. I know that we've already got questions coming in. You can hit us up on our hashtag RealTalkRJ. People want to hear what's Charles's take on the pipeline. What's his take on the U.S. senators coming up to, so we'll get into it. We'll talk, conservative leadership race, federally speaking. We'll talk Jason Kenney's leadership review. I just want to see how Chuck's doing.
Me too.
He's I don't know. Is he like retired life? Like, is he going to join us, wearing sort of lounge wear and just hanging out, or is he going to be all suited up? I don't know. We'll see.
He doesn't seem like the type. I just was going to say he doesn't seem like he'd slow down.
I don't think so.
No.
Yeah, I don't know if he's the guy that just puts his feet up, but we'll find out. So Charles Adler coming up in about a half hour. We'll get the show rolling right now by reminding you that this show doesn't happen without the support of our sponsors, and that includes the team at Bitcoin. Well, Bitcoin right now and a lot of the other cryptocurrencies, if you're paying attention, took a bit of a hit yesterday. I saw somebody saying, I thought that this was supposed to be inflation-proof. That's what Pierre Poilievre was saying, that Bitcoin, you can protect yourself from inflation. So what's up with this? And I was telling you yesterday, same sort of a deal. Like when the NASDAQ dives, crypto tends to take a bit of it. So why is that? If you're trying to wrap your mind around this, maybe your questions are entry level, maybe they're advanced. The team at Bitcoin Well wants to take them. They've got a team of real live humans ready for a little Q&A. I recommend them. You can find them under the sponsors tab on our website, RyanJesperson.com.
Real Talk starts right now. Here's Ryan Jesperson.
Well, of course, the war in Ukraine continues, the death toll rising to unimaginable levels. Allegations of Russian war crimes as investigators are exhuming bodies from mass graves. Canadians and folks around the world, quite frankly, wondering what it's going to take to stop this Russian aggression. What's driving this Russian aggression? David Knight Legg is an advisor to investment and political risk firms. He was the founding CEO of Invest Alberta Corporation, served as principal advisor to Alberta Premier Jason Kenney up to a short time ago, and it's always a pleasure to welcome David Knight Legg to the show. Thanks for making time for us.
Hey, you're welcome, Ryan. Good to be here.
Yeah, you were just back. You were in transit. We wanted to talk to you yesterday. You were on your way back. Was it Switzerland, something like that? Your work kind of takes you all around the world.
Yeah, I was in Zurich actually, talking with some people about crypto. Actually, we just had it at the top of the conversation there. So yeah, a lot going on around the world right now. A lot of things that are linked in unusual ways. Of course, the thing that I was writing about for certain people that are interested in it was the link between energy and what's happening in Ukraine, but a lot that's happening with cryptocurrency as well right now with, as people have looked at what's going on with fiat currencies.
Well, I'll intentionally leave some time in our conversation to talk to you about cryptocurrency because I know people would be interested in what you have to say about that. But let's lead with the story garnering all of the international headlines right now, and this is Russian aggression in Ukraine. In particular, people are looking at the city of Mariupol, and as it appears set to fall, Ukraine's president acknowledging as much in an address to his citizens and to the world just the other day. You wrote for the Wall Street Journal just a couple of days ago. People can check it out at WSJ.com. Putin's Ukraine invasion is about energy and natural resources. You almost, people that are suggesting that perhaps Vladimir Putin underestimated Ukraine. You're not convinced that that's the scenario right now?
Well, I do think he underestimated Ukraine, but I think the argument is not. The argument is actually not that he has one and only one strategy. It's that he has a layered strategy, and that he's highly adaptive, and he's proven that in the past. What he told us about himself at the beginning of this thing was that he was offended by the discussions of NATO expansion. He was offended by the Maidan Revolution and the democratization of Ukrainian politics, and he was offended by the fact that there was a lack of integration in the former Russo, Belarusian, Russian, ethnic Russian communities, which he emphasized when he took Crimea. I think what he learned from Crimea that was a mistake was that you can do that in 4 or 5 days with special forces teams, basically decapitating the operation at the head of state level. And that didn't work this time. It didn't work in Kiev. But the argument that means that it's a total failure for him misunderstands what he did in Crimea in 2014, which was that he stole several $100 billion worth of assets, laid claim to them, created an exclusive economic zone in the Black Sea, which gave him, according to the Ukrainians at the time, 80% of all their offshore oil. And he proceeded within a year to get the West to start buying energy from him again. And so my concern, and the concern that was picked up by the New York Times writer Bret Stephens, and that I ended up talking with CBS News about, and ultimately, just so there was total clarity on it, I encourage your listeners to go to the Wall Street Journal article, because that's where I spell out exactly what my position is on this, is that he is actually going to lock down in the Donbass region all across the east through the Black Sea and basically lay claim to 90% of Ukraine's resources. And they are very, very large supply of, sixth largest supply of coal in the planet. They are the second largest supply of gas in Europe. Most of it has been undeveloped, but a lot of that lack of development has been because of very tactical moves by Russia to try and cut off Ukrainian development. And so my concern is that we are able to respond to this more effectively by understanding the threat that it poses. And the response is to get Canadian and American energy in place of Russian energy to offset what the Europeans have to have right now. Right now, they're paying 500 to 800% more. All through this war, they've been paying Putin $600 to $800 million every single day into unsanctioned banks in Russia that he insists that they pay into. Even the Americans are paying about $100 million a day through this to the Russians for their oil. This is insane. These are NATO countries. We have enough supply in Canada, the US, to supply this gas. And the gas is essential for the decarbonization efforts of moving the electrical grid across Europe off of coal onto gas. And it's time, I think, for North America in particular to get out of its own way on energy, not let the climate energy discussion become this false choice, and to start to build the kind of global trade structures we need to provide the gas that's needed in Europe. And also, as you know, one of my pet and favorite topics, particularly into Asia.
Well, so David, we've got politicians. I mean, I can think of Alberta's premier as one, your former boss, that saying, this crisis in Ukraine is yet another opportunity to have these conversations about where the world gets its energy. I mean, you look back on the conversations about so-called ethical oil and everything else that some Canadians have been driving over the last 15 or 20 years. And while there can be some good points made, I mean, in particular, would you rather buy your oil off the Saudis or buy your oil off Canada with stringent environmental standards? People will say, well, yeah, the argument makes sense, but yet the market doesn't seem to respond. Like Irving Oil in Eastern Canada still bringing their oil in from outside the country. So why does the argument not land? And do you have any confidence that this context, this war in Ukraine, could maybe move the conversation where others haven't?
Yeah, look, I think we just have a lot of hangups in the way that we've talked about climate change and the way we've talked about a transition from hydrocarbons, fossil fuels, into renewable energy, and the huge gap in popular understanding of what that means and how fast that can happen has meant that there's a political cost to being overtly supportive of our energy sector. And you can see it in sort of the schizophrenia currently in the federal budget. Canada has more oil than Russia, China, and the United States put together. We're an incredibly strategic reserve of oil, and there's global demand skyrocketing for oil, particularly in Asia. But we can't get it out right now. And that's no one's fault but Canadians. That's simply a political inability to come to terms with what it's going to take in terms of getting the right infrastructure in place to get it out. Russians are happy to get it out. So are the Saudis, so are the Iranians, so are the Venezuelans. We've got this deeply ironic moment where you have the president of the United States cap in hand to Russia during this whole war in Vienna right now. Russia is operating as an interlocutor between Iran and the United States. And they've sent an emissary down to talk to Venezuela about oil access, energy access. This is crazy. The U.S. has been taking every day exactly the same amount of oil that they would be getting through the KXL pipeline. So from Russia. So, just over 800,000 barrels a day coming into the U.S. from Russia of oil that they could be getting through KXL. So it's worse for the climate because the Russians don't have nearly the ESG standards that we do. It's worse for the climate because they're taking it on seaborne shipping rather than through a pipeline, which is far more secure than all the alternatives that are out there. But the reason that it's happening, if you talk to somebody in the Democratic Party and they say, look, this is kind of a third rail issue because the president made this promise to Bill McKibben and 360.org and some of the really big sponsors of his campaign out of California. So he's got to keep it. He's just got to shut it down. So what you've got, both the Liberal Party in Canada, the Democratic Party in the US, is kind of a state capture of a certain way of thinking about the climate and thinking about energy where it's become a false choice. And while the West is incapable of getting out of its own way on some of these things, the despotic countries are happy to fill in the gaps. And so what you have right now is all of Western Europe is on a short leash to Vladimir Putin, and they can't do anything but do what he tells them to do, or he can turn off the lights. And so that's the state of play. And I do think that there are people really waking up to this, particularly in the United States. I think the fact that they've lost energy independence for their own country has been a huge wake-up call. And I think that the political considerations, unfortunately, hasn't taken the rationality around the fact that democracies should be the source of energy rather than despotic states. What it's really taken is enough voters facing down the fuel pump and realizing that their household wallet is getting compressed by the fact that whatever the policies are, it's resulting in way too much being spent to heat homes, keep the lights on, or put gas in their car.
So when you say,
and so that's where you're starting to see pressure come up, where there's a desire for a political solution across the aisle.
When you say that you think that Americans or some Americans are waking up to this, what do you mean in particular? You think that means that you think that the tide could turn, or maybe even the conviction within the Oval Office might evolve or change with regards to, I mean, you mentioned Keystone XL. Senator Joe Manchin's up in Alberta right now talking to Energy Minister, talking to the Premier. Acting like that pipeline's not yet dead, despite the president's position on it. You think that...
No, it's not dead.
No?
No, it's going to be back. I mean, that pipeline is a zombie that just doesn't die. It's coming back. It has to come back. You can't have a situation where the world's largest, most productive economy is starving for oil and they're cap in hand to Venezuela, Iran, and Russia for it. I mean, this doesn't work long term. And Senator Joe Manchin is a Democrat. He's in a coal-rich state. He understands the reality of how the fossil fuel stair-step works. Right? Look at Canada right now. I mean, Canada's in this incredibly embarrassing position where we were actually lecturing at points the United States for leaving the Paris Accord, but the US has reduced their total global emissions from the Paris Accord baseline by over 15%. Taking out last year was the highest reduction ever, but last year was a weird year because of COVID. Over 20, they're at 22% right now. I think they're going to come back. But Canada, as of 2019, the last normal economic year, is at exactly the same place that it was in 2005, 719 megatons of carbon emissions. Exactly the same place. We had zero change. And it actually, we were in a better place in 2015, but the Liberal Party is far more committed rhetorically to environmental positions than the Conservative Party has been. And yet, during the 5 years they've been in control, emissions have gotten worse. Our performance has gone down on the emissions question. But the punchline is it won't matter. The current approach doesn't matter. All emissions are global. All emissions are global. Our 719 megatons is a total rounding error. It's 1.4% of global emissions. It used to be 2% of global emissions. The reason it's 1.4 is because you've had a 28% increase in the total pool of global emissions, while we've held ours flat, right? And that is how, the number one way for us to become the first net zero country in the planet is we have enough gas to actually totally replace thermal coal on the Chinese electrical grid. And by doing that, not across the entire grid, that grid is massive, but China just built 5 times the coal-fired capacity of the rest of the world combined last year. They are not keeping any promises with respect to Paris, but we could offset more than 719 megatons plus the incremental carbon emissions we would have from producing more gas. By shipping that into China, we can remove far more global emissions than our entire country utilizes in a year or creates in a year. That's our potential as a nation. That's how big a resource base we have. That's how powerful we could be in the world right now, solving a fundamental ecological environmental problem by reducing global emissions. They're not called domestic emissions for a reason, right? They're global. We can help offset that, doing exactly what the US has done to achieve their emissions reduction. Exactly what Europe has been trying to do, unfortunately, instead of by producing their own shale gas, by buying it from a dictator like Putin. So I think this conversation is starting to become, the adults are starting to get back into the room again and say, look, if we're serious about global emissions as a nation, we got to stop it with these sort of small ball attempts to tax certain things, right? Useless. Will make zero difference to the planet, right? If you want to make a big difference, do what the US did with domestic capacity, do what Europe did by trade. We can be the trading partner into China, India, Korea, Japan. We can remove far more carbon from the atmosphere than the total footprint that we create. That's what they need and want from us. All the speeches mean nothing. All the jetting around to these environmental conferences have meant nothing. And unless we do it, then Russia's happy to fill in the gap. And that's part of what I talked about in the Wall Street Journal. Vladimir Putin's been busy doing deals with China and India, which is one of the reasons why India is so quiet on the sanctions and hasn't been participating. And it's very dangerous. If you empower these despots, they use energy not simply as an economic wedge, but as a geopolitical weapon, which is what you see happening right now.
We're talking to David Knight Legg. You can also link to his recent interview on CBS News via his Twitter account, Knight Legg, and we tweeted that out from our official account, Real Talk RJ, earlier this morning. You've heard that metaphor, I'm sure, before when people talk about energy flow or energy transport. Let's say, pipelines, essentially, and use the metaphor of cities and commuter routes and ring roads, and talk about how it's not necessarily intuitive, where this is going, to ease traffic flow by simply widening the roads again and again and again. You want to explore alternative avenues like public transportation and others. In the context of this conversation, let me ask you, when we talk about the price hikes, for example, the pain that people see at the pumps or in heating their homes, and how this may drive their personal conviction or political action on things like energy sources and relationships. I mean, what role do renewables play in this? At some point, when we take a look at this reliance, this dependence on oil and gas, and the political instability and everything else that comes with it, where do renewables fit in? You're an expert on investment, so what does that conversation look like?
Look, I think renewables are great, but we have to understand the characteristic of each one of these different things we've got, and all of these things are great. You know, if you're in Bangladesh right now, Ryan, we can't ship wind molecules or sunlight molecules to Bangladesh. You know, Alberta is the headquarters for solar and wind in Canada. It's not shippable, right? It's not transferable. You can't help the places that are struggling the most by having to use biomass in the wider population struggling with poverty, or having to use coal to fire their electrical grid because it's low cost and accessible. The one low cost accessible thing that we can send around the planet, because we're only 35 million people and there's 7.5 billion people out there, right? The places where the emissions are the greatest and have the greatest challenges need transferable assets. And so that's why gas is so important, because it provides the same amount of energy at half the emissions as thermal coal, which is what all these countries that are principally dealing with trying to move another 1.5 billion people out of poverty into a middle class so their kids have the same chances our kids have. That energy intensive requirement on the grid is what we're trying to solve for. Canada is doing fine in terms of its emissions, right? You can't do much for Canadian emissions because we already had a pretty clean grid due to our use of gas and our amazing hydro out east. But what we can do in the planet is actually transfer our gas. We can't transfer our solar or our wind. So that's one feature of gas that makes it super important. And the fact that we have so much of it makes it super important. Look, I think it's an all of the above answer. We want to use solar wherever we can. I love what, Musk is doing in some ways. I think it's important for people to know, though, look, electric vehicles, most of them, most places in the world run on coal. Most Teslas run on coal all over the world. In China, they all run on coal, right? Through the grid. So unless you change the fundamentals of the major sources of the major demand of energy that creates the electricity that we're demanding more and more from every, household, then you haven't actually fundamentally changed the emissions equation. Most of which is happening, and most of the growth the last 20 years has been located in Asia. So transferability is super important. I am really excited about hydrogen, and Edmonton is going to be one of the big global players in hydrogen. That's what I was working on when I stepped back from Invest Alberta. We got Rick in there as CEO. It's something I continue to help out on, having great conversations with some of the world's largest, most sophisticated scientific companies that are fascinated with the potential for hydrogen, particularly on heavy lift solutions like rail, which Edmonton is centered on, and trucking. And I think that that's going to be one of those, it's going to take a while for it to reach the right kind of economies of scale. The other one that I really love is small modular nuclear. And this is something that Fort McMurray is going to be seeing some of the latest, greatest, most interesting technology on small modular nuclear as a way of creating a carbon zero method for the energy required to do extraction. So these innovations that are on the horizon are absolutely phenomenal and couldn't be more exciting. But we're going to have to be good at all these things, and Canada can do it. We can ship our lowest cost landed gas on the planet to compete with the Russians to take away their market in China. I'd love to see us do it and get out of our own way to do that. And I think, and I hope that as we see these things start to really have human tragedy attached to them, it forces a much clearer light, much more logic around what are we actually trying to do here? How are we going to do it? And what role can Canada play in the globe? Not just our domestic politics, right? What role can we play in the globe, given the extraordinary resources we've been blessed with as a super huge nation with a very, very small population?
David Knight Legg is the former chair as well of the ESG working group for the province of Alberta. And as mentioned, former principal advisor for Alberta's Premier Jason Kenney, who was down in Red Deer this past weekend, as you know, obviously speaking to a relatively small and curated group at a Red Deer hotel as part of this leadership review. Kenney says, as Don Braid writes in a recent column for the Calgary Herald, he'll quit if he loses, but he's pleading for unity. for the United Conservative Party to keep its to stay united heading into the next provincial election? If you were still advising Alberta's Premier, what would you be telling him? What are the important points that he needs to make? You don't need to remind you, don't need to point out that the polling numbers aren't as strong as he'd like, to say the least.
Yeah. Well, it's such a, I think the Conservative Party, provincially and nationally, Ryan, I think it's something in the DNA of Conservatives. Maybe it's like the libertarian streak or something, but it reminds me of that part in the Braveheart film where he's about to they just get unified on fighting the English, and then by the time the night's out, they're too busy fighting each other and planning revenge to even think about fighting the other guys. And it seems like there's something kind of congenital sort of issue internally with always letting the perfect be the enemy of the pretty good, and I think in the case of Premier Kenney, really good. I also think that there's a tendency, and I've seen this with, even some of my friends in the NDP and elsewhere, this is not about individual people, and I think that politics is a little bit of a blood sport that interests political nerds like me, maybe if my family and friends are any indication, maybe that's 10% of us, care
maybe,
that much.
Yeah, and, maybe 5.
And follow the intricacies of, which player is potentially, and actually 90% of people are just like, they're getting on with their lives. They're sort of like, look, I do my job every day. Just go away and do your job. Do it as well as you can. I'll vote for you when I want to vote for you. If you can prove to me that what your plan for my province and for the place that I want my kids to inherit is better than the other person's plan, I'll give you my vote. And if it's not, I'm not going to give you my vote. But stop this crazy drama all the time, right? And it's sort of I think that the thing that I like about the Premier so much is he's an incredibly intensively hard worker. I was very close to him, and I told him this. I had been working with CEO of the ninth largest bank. I was running strategy for him globally. And the Premier puts in at least those hours. He just cranks on this stuff. He's got things about his personality a lot of people don't like, things that people do like. But this is not about an individual person, right? It's not about, and I realize leadership.
But with him, David, it kind of with
people. But this is about what the province needs right now.
But it does feel
has got to be under economic development.
That's what you would advise, and I would agree with you. But I think that this is about an individual person a little bit. I think that's something that's quite unique in this scenario, or maybe not unique, but at least with Kenney, people feel personally either really annoyed at him, upset at him, or they're big fans of his. And I think that he fans those flames, and he's got his fervent supporters, and then he's got people that would do anything to prevent his government from winning again in 2023. I'm just not. I mean, with regards to, I don't think that any political leader at any level has had it easy, to say the least, through COVID. I can't even imagine how difficult the job is. But I'd be curious to know, like, in the back rooms, I mean, when you're principal advisor, do you see this party on a collision course right from the very beginning? I mean, like, to get it together, to bring the Wild Rose and the PCs together to win an election. I mean, the enthusiasm there. There was a great column I mentioned, Don Braid, describing the cult, or the vibe in Red Deer over this past weekend. He said, 2.5 years ago, that place was rocking with 3,000 people. Now there's 100 people in there. Obviously, some implications for that. And talking about how maybe this ultimately might be inevitable. Like, maybe it's impossible for Alberta small C Conservatives to maintain one big party where everybody gets along. The Premier takes fire from both sides on a lot of issues.
Well, Ryan, I think that it's a little bit like what you saw happen when the Reform Party and the federal Conservatives became one party, I just think there is sort of a period of, like, this is happening in a pretty compressed timeline. You did an amazing job kind of creating startup Conservative Party, unifying a lot of different factions, holding those together through the cabinet and the caucus. And now, through COVID, I think you've got so much political ferment. I mean, I'm in Europe right now. I was back in Hong Kong and Singapore a month ago. I mean, there is not a single politician that is in shape with respect to their base or their pot populists right now. I think it's a particularly tough time. I think people have had a very hard couple of years, and that frustration is coming out. I think one thing that's unique about a more populist conservative movement is the areas for venting that frustration are structured in the constitution of the UCP in a way that means that, you know, you could have this stuff work its way out through this process. I think the premier is going to be fine coming out of this. And I think the task is going to be finding the key policies that everybody can agree to, right? And, you know, when we wrote those out back when we were running the campaign, there's a specific reason why we put everything. You know, some friends of mine were teasing me about it, saying no one's going to read this, but the point was it was all written out there. And I think that the next phase of this has to be returned to the debate about those policies, what they mean for Albertans, what they mean for the next generation of Albertans. And then the leadership piece, because I agree with you completely, it's very much about one person right now, but I think that's something that I know the premier wouldn't want it to be about. I think that he wants it to be about a set of ideas about what will make Alberta work better. And those ideas have to be, you know, debated with Rachel Notley's NDP as well. And that clash has got to happen for Albertans to be able to pick which kind of path they want the province to go down. And so I think that my hope is that this is, and I'm far away from it right now, but my hope is that this is a step towards further cementing the fact that we can have these disagreements within a party structure, but ultimately we go through this and then we get back to work doing the work that Albertans care about.
David, before we let you go, and I sure appreciate your time, you mentioned crypto. This wasn't on the list of things that we said we might touch on, but I'm sure you won't mind. As mentioned, you've obviously been a finance expert for a long time. You've worked for the big banks. You've worked with the big banks. Generally speaking, I won't get the question too focused, but what's your take? I mean, when you're in those boardrooms and when you're talking to people about the future of cryptocurrency, some people think it's going to be nothing in 5 years. Some people think it's the future. I mean, what's the perspective in those boardrooms?
Well, it's definitely, I mean, look, the best way to understand it is not to just call it currency. The best way to understand it is to think about it as a combination of two things that have started to have a very powerful kind of valence effect. And the two things are open source software, which we had from the beginning with, do you remember Linux?
Well, I mean, I'm not smart enough to understand it, but I remember hearing about it.
Yeah. So what the big movement back then was that suddenly, instead of having all your software made by employees of big companies like a Microsoft or Google, you could have open source software. So any really smart coder in Venezuela could work on a project with somebody in England, who could work on it with somebody at Bell Labs, who could work on it with someone in Russia, right? And what that meant was you could use parallel processing by linking all these computers together and linking all the intellectual property, these coders together. You could come up with software that was much better, could do a lot more, and could be built way faster than sitting inside an enterprise, any one enterprise. That was a big, big deal, right? And now Linux is kind of the operating basis for a lot of everything we do on our computing. You're seeing this breakout in things like cloud now, right? Which people sort of understand on the enterprise side. So about 10 years ago, you had cryptography started to reach the next level of sophistication. And part of this is to do with how fast processing speeds could work. And part of it had to do with the development of artificial intelligence, AIs, and other things. And so what you've got now with what they're now calling Web3, thankfully, because I think that's changing it away from just cryptocurrency, is you're putting these two things together. You're putting open source software and cryptography together. And what that means is the cryptography means that you can protect and you can provide through existing systems all kinds of protected functions. Big one is the financial system, right? So you and I can buy Bitcoin and we can be secure in the fact that we have it. It'll always be attached to us, maybe through a pseudonym or a particular string of numbers, but we'll have that cryptocurrency. And no one government, not the Canadian government, US, Venezuelan government, Russians, can take that away from us. As long as we have our string of digits and we know how to access it, we can access it anywhere in the globe. And if you look at the guys that were really pushing Bitcoin about 8-9 years ago, it was guys from Latin America, particularly Venezuela. A guy named Wences Casares, somebody named Mickey Malka, a few others were saying, look, the amazing thing about this stuff is it would allow people that are in countries where you maybe can't trust the government and where maybe currencies will continue to debase and people could lose all the stuff they worked for all their life. And you can actually have something that's held effectively in the cloud by everybody that utilizes it, rather than having a single government function. Now, the debate that's going on is that going to actually threaten the sovereignty of fiat currencies at some point? And the European Union just announced that they're going to look into that. US has just released a paper on it. That's where the debate's at right now. So I think you're going to see a lot of volatility in cryptocurrencies, but it's absolutely here to stay. And the development of non-fungible tokens and a bunch of other things that are taking off is going to happen. And Alberta has got some amazing global firms coming in and out right now that are the powerhouses in this space. Part of it to do with the way that they can fund the massive processing systems around the creation of the cryptocurrency blocks. And part of it because we've got some great coding talent and we've got specializations in related areas like AI, machine learning, and other things that are very important for tracking and solving for the complexity around this stuff. But yeah, it's absolutely here to stay. It's just going to be a question of how it will be regulated.
Yeah, fascinating to watch. We were touching on the show just the other day about El Salvador's president essentially calling Bitcoin FU money and pushing back on the U.S.
Yeah.
And, of course, the Americans, it's all over their radar, and a fascinating story to watch. Always appreciate different perspectives on it. David Knight Legg, welcome back to the show, and thanks for giving us your time today. We appreciate it.
Did you just have a birthday?
I did yesterday, yeah.
Yeah, how old, man?
45, pal. So
still looking good.
Well, thanks very much.
You got to trim that beard. I mean, I can't see you on this, but
yeah,
that last picture I saw of you on your profile picture, you look like a cartel member. So maybe it's time to trim that beard.
Yeah, well, I was on vacation, so I was behaving like one too, in a certain sense. Trying to play a couple money games on the golf course to no success. So
there you go.
Yeah. Anyway,
all right,
nice to see you, David.
Well,
thanks for doing this.
Good to speak again.
Yeah,
Take care.
You bet. That's David Knight Legg was the founding CEO of Invest Alberta Corporation. You can follow him on Twitter at Knight Legg. Let us know what you think about what you heard. Talk at ryanjesperson.com is the best way to get in touch. The Titan of Talk is coming up in just a second. But before we do, we're going to pay a few bills, and we're going to do that first by reminding you we are to partner with our friends at the Dairy Queens of Northwest Edmonton and Sherwood Park. They're particularly excited about their new lineup. There's 6 of them, these signature stack burgers. You can find these at the Dairy Queens in Palisades, Nemeo, Newcastle, Westmount, and if you're in Sherwood Park, Baseline Road as well. My personal recommendation is the Loaded Steakhouse signature stack burger. You've got the bacon, you've got the onion rings. These ones you can make them a single, double, or a triple. The triple takes you up to a half-pounder. You make sure you let them know you're there because you heard about them on Real Talk at the Dairy Queens of Northwest Edmonton and Sherwood Park. While you're out in Sherwood Park, why not swing by Sherwood Dodge? They've got a great selection of that full Jeep lineup, as well as Canada's best-selling truck, the back-to-back-to-back Motor Trend Truck of the Year. That is, of course, the Ram. I'm right now driving the half-ton version, that 1500 Longhorn. Absolutely love it. Can't wait to pull a boat this summer. Of course, they've got their way all the way up to the heavy haulers, the Ram 3500s, and a great pre-owned selection. You can browse them online, Sherwood and St. Albert Dodge, via the Sponsors tab on our website. Our friends at Local Environmental want you to know that we are accepting submissions for Trash Talk. That comes up every Friday as we wrap up our week here on Real Talk. Local Environmental's been sponsoring that fan favorite segment since inception. They've been keeping it local for 25 years, still family owned, and constantly growing their footprint across Alberta and Saskatchewan, including new services like portable toilets and fencing and water hauling and vacuum trucks. Whatever you need, they've got you covered at competitive prices. They'll fight for your business. You can find them online at localenvironmental.ca. And if you're in the mood to just get the heck out of Dodge, if you're looking for a sunnier locale and you're going to be flying out of Edmonton International Airport, we encourage you to park at Jet Set Parking. I did just a week and a half ago. Super simple. The promo code, you want to use the promo code REALTALK at jetsetparking.com. Make sure you book at least 24 hours in advance. You can book for travel all the way through to the end of the year. And the promo code REALTALK gets you parking for $7 a day. Are you kidding me? That's jetsetparking.com. The promo code REALTALK. Dealing with Jetset, I guarantee you'll love it. All right, well, our next guest is one of the most talented talk radio personalities that North America has ever seen. He's got an Emmy Award to prove it. He's got an RTDNA Lifetime Achievement Award. He's a personal friend, a longtime legendary host on both radio and television. They call him the Titan of Talk. What a pleasure to welcome to the show, Charles Adler. How you doing, pal?
Ryan, we're doing well. I hope I don't disappoint the mountain of cerebral viewers that you've got based on the interview with Mr. Legg. I can't compete in that high terrain.
Oh, give me a break. For decades, people have been looking to you, Charles, for Canadian common sense, and you've been delivering monologues off the cuff on an incredible array of subject matter. One of the things I've loved about tuning into your show before I got to know you personally is that people came to you for your take, whether you were talking about the war in Ukraine or whether you were talking about perhaps political scandal at a provincial or a municipal level, whether you were talking about elections or whether you were talking about, as the radio coaches say, the dog poop on the sidewalk, the stuff that everybody can relate to. People always cared about what you...
As you say, the variety of topics that one gets into. And why does one get into a variety? Because to me, that's where the real human mind goes. There are some people who are hyper-specialized in a particular subject. I'm not like that. I'm the proud scion of people who ran general stores for many generations in the old country and in Europe. And that's how I look at my show. It's a general store.
Mm-hmm. Well, I can let you know that our live chat right now, and the majority of the people that hear this interview, Charles, they'll hear it later. They'll stream it on demand. They'll download the podcast. But the hundreds of people that are joining us right now are losing their minds that you're here with us right now, just in all caps. People are just saying, Charles Adler. People are excited to have you here because they haven't heard your voice for a while, Chuck. It's been several months since you stepped away from the AM dials. What have you been up to? How's life been?
Well, I turned the mute on about 9 months ago. Something happened that should never happen to a talk show. I got really bored. I mean, it was to a point where, sometimes, I'd almost, fall asleep on the air. And, some people say, Chuck, you should never admit that. I don't care. My life is an open book. And that's just the way it was. So it was, definitely time. It was definitely time to move on. This isn't about blaming anybody. This could be just as simple as age or the boundless amount of curiosity I have. And I was curious about things that, were beyond the scope of the show. So life has been good. I've been relaxed. I've been doing a little bit of consulting. I'm a private sector person. So I've got clients who, for some reason, think that I might be the right person to help with some media coaching. So I've been doing some of that, and that's a lot of fun, Ryan.
Oh, right on. Well, it's amazing to hear your voice again, and you and I have a special relationship that I don't mind divulging. Is I've looked to you for wisdom, I've looked to you for opinion, I've looked to you for coaching, quite frankly, and you've certainly been an amazing friend and an amazing resource there. And I'm always curious to pick your brain on some of the storylines that we're seeing. I was just talking to David Knight Legg, former principal advisor to Alberta's Premier, who finds himself now essentially fighting for his job, not on the campaign trail, Charles, but trying to keep his party together, trying to keep the support of party members in this leadership vote where the Premier insists it's got to be 50% plus one, though I can't imagine a Premier sticking around with 50% plus one approval. You've never minced words when it's come to Jason Kenney. You've had a long time awareness of him, a relationship with him. You've spoken with him many times. What's your take of the state of Jason Kenney's government in Alberta right now?
Well, Jason Kenney was a very, very close friend of mine. And of course, there was a night a little over 2 years ago where I felt completely bushwhacked, completely betrayed by how he handled an interview that we had. And some people feel that interview went off the rails, and other people, say much kinder things about that particular interview. But life certainly for me and Kenny changed after that. Relations were completely severed, and some people tried to, build some bridges, and that never happened. So I just want to put that on the plate for you. When people say sometimes, Chuck, it sometimes sounds personal between you and Kenny. Well, it is personal. And for those people, I mean, Mr. Legg and Mr. Knight Legg tried to make the case that this was about issues and ideas. And as you push back on that, quite rightly, no, it's about an individual. The leadership review is not about ideas and issues. It's about confidence or lack thereof in Mr. Kenney. I felt a little over 2 years ago when we did that interview that he failed the test of leadership. He failed the test of trust, credibility, integrity, morals. I could go down the line. And I felt at that time that if he continues down that path, whatever path he was on, for whatever reason he chose to be on that path, if he continued on that path, he would be a one-term premier. And today, he very much looks to most of us like a one-termer.
You've, I mean, for the majority of your career, lion's share of your career, you broadcast your nationally syndicated show out of a city that I know you love. I mean, you got lots of love for Winnipeg. You did several years of your show out of Vancouver. You grew up in Montreal, correct? I mean, you've lived across the country, but you've always felt. I've picked this up. I mean, you've spelled it out. You felt a real affinity for Alberta, and you've really, I think, had a clear understanding of the politics and the unique dynamics in Alberta. Do you think that it's possible, with the rural factors at play, with the long-held political affiliations, with the progressive nature of Alberta's cities to a certain degree, do you think it's possible to keep a Conservative Party united in Alberta for longer than 1 4-year stretch?
I don't know, because this idea that the two Conservative parties have more similarities than they have differences, I just don't buy that. I mean, the only way to sell that horse is to say, well, they're both against the NDP. It's not good enough. You know, it's not, as a voter, it's not good enough for someone to say, well, you know, if you don't like Trudeau, then you've got to vote for, you know, for Poilievre, for instance. And, you know, if you're not crazy about Rachel Notley, well, you've got to vote for Jason Kenney. I just think that insults the intelligence of people. There is no natural unifying bridge right now between the two factions of the Conservative Party. And frankly, there are far more than two factions, but let's just say two for the purpose of the conversation in Alberta. You know, let's call it the Wild Rose faction and the PC faction. And I think that was really brought out and borne out in the recent pandemic, which, you know, I call it recent. You know, people say, Chuck, don't call it that. It's still ongoing. Well, of course it is, and we're about to enter another wave, a sixth wave. But I think the pandemic really showed us the fissure between the two Conservative sides, and Jason Kenney did not acquit himself well. He just played himself as kind of the victim of both sides. Instead of being the chair of the board and unifying both, he ended up dividing people against each other.
I don't even know, and I'm not giving him a pass on this, Charles, you know that, but I don't know how you would manage that. Like that's why I'm always curious to pick people's brains that are senior political strategists or principal advisors or chiefs of staff to say how on earth like would someone like Jason Kenney, it might be, maybe it's a little bit different if you're John Horgan. Maybe it's, I don't know. Maybe it's a little bit different if you're the Premier of Quebec or Prince Edward Island, but in Alberta, when you say to be the chair of the board, like, what does that look like? With regards to COVID policy, you've got a politician has no option but to politic. And when you have pull from both sides of your party, and I'm certainly painting with broad stroke brushes here, but I don't know how you manage that without alienating like 50% of your support. It's a tough gig.
Look, based on British Columbia, and I did something there I'd never done in my life before, never thought I would ever do. I voted NDP. Now, why did I vote NDP? I wasn't voting for socialism. I don't cut it as a socialist, and no one who knows me thinks I do. So I wasn't voting for socialism. I was voting not for John Horgan or the NDP. I was voting for Bonnie Henry. And John Horgan was smart enough to put Henry up front. Now, Kenney thought about doing that a time or two, but he would then constantly undercut his Bonnie Henry. I don't know whether you and I would agree or disagree on that. But, you know, a person who started out, she was the top medical officer in Alberta, and she started out, Hinshaw is who I'm talking about, Dina Hinshaw. She started out with a lot of credibility, but after going through the Kenney machine, as it were, she ended up losing her credibility, and that's unfortunate. But what's unfortunate politically for Mr. Kenney is without a strong top medical officer, you can't navigate COVID. You just can't. And I'll never understand why he, in so many ways, and his crew decided to throw Dina Hinshaw under the bus.
Yeah, I don't know. Scapegoat, take some heat off. I don't know. There's probably strategically a bunch of reasons. How have you been? I mean, you've always been a man of the people, Chuck. I mean, that's been a big part of your show, is understanding or tapping into what people feel and what people are experiencing. I feel like a visceral reaction when you say, quite rightfully, you know, COVID is still here and we're about to enter a sixth wave. And I'm looking at some of the data that the scientists, that the researchers, that the healthcare professionals are pushing out, and I'm going, a sixth wave. And then I also know what I feel personally and how I feel about trying to find some normalcy. And quite frankly, and some people might be upset to hear it, but how good it feels to go to a hockey game, or how good it feels to sit in a restaurant. And I know that average, ordinary folks are trying to reconcile that. They're trying to find that balance of a public duty, right? And of that sort of stick-to-itiveness that we need to maintain. And at the same time going, well, I mean, geez, you know, and it may not be a popular take, right? It's much easier to on your social media show the photos of you wearing a mask and staying home and continuing to wash your hands and do all the right things. But people are ready to try to get their lives back to normal, if not for them, for the sake of their kids or what have you. How are you finding that balance, or how are you processing what you're seeing around you?
Well, you know, I'm out there. I'm out there with real folks, and I count on the geniuses in the vaccine movement. You know, I am constantly sort of perplexed by how many people want to buy into anti-vax when it's obvious, it becomes more obvious every day that, yes, people are getting COVID, but thank God for those vaccines. That's what's rescuing us. So to me, yeah, you know, be out there in the world, engage in the world. You know, I don't want Edmonton or Winnipeg or Vancouver. I don't want a Shanghai in this country. For anyone who doesn't know what I'm talking about, just, you know, go online and see what's happening in Shanghai, where 90-year-olds are screaming out their windows, begging for food because they're locked down because China's got this zero COVID policy. It doesn't matter that tens of thousands of Chinese every single day. So who knows how many hundreds of thousands of Chinese have COVID-19 right now. The government insists on this idea that you've got to lock it all down and you've got to get it down to zero. It's not possible to do that, and people are suffering. I don't want us to have a Shanghai lifestyle. I don't think we ever will have, but that's not what I advocate for. I do advocate for people getting whatever boosters the real doctors are calling for, and to please tune out. Please tune out the witch doctors. They're not helping things.
Yeah. I saw somebody the other day, I mean, I'll just paraphrase them, but said something along the lines of when boosters are spun as some sort of an evidence that the vaccine's not effective or that COVID can't be beat or what have you, they said, just wait till these folks hear about the flu shot. It's kind of funny, right? Like most people don't think twice about getting their flu shot every year, every couple of years. But then when it comes to boosters, there's this great cynicism. And I don't know how you combat that, I guess, just with continued diligent public messaging and continuing to try to inform public opinion, right?
Well, you've got to keep reminding people that the vaccine is not about stopping you from getting the disease. The vaccine is from stopping you from entering a grave before your time. It's about the avoidance of death. It's about the avoidance of serious sickness. Anyone who sells you on the idea that vaccines don't work because people are getting COVID is a lying son of a bitch.
Chuck, I don't know where to go from here because I've got a list of about 15 things that I want to talk to you about. But I opened the show today just with some general observations about what's happening in Ukraine. My stomach was twisted in all kinds of knots last night. Graphic images, as the storyteller, the journalist that I was watching was reporting, there aren't even screens or tents or barriers around some of these mass graves as these remarkable people work to exhume these bodies, to conduct proper autopsies, to document these mass murders, quite frankly, Charles. And there are these Ukrainian citizens standing there, civilians, weeping. Obviously, one woman, they're trying to, I mean, Chuck, these are corpses here, these bodies, and she's trying desperately to find her husband. She knows that he was shot and killed. She doesn't know where his body is. She's trying to find him. I get chills now as I'm even talking about it. I don't know how people wrap their minds around it. one of those that's participating in these autopsies said the thing that's driving him, the thing that's motivating him, that's giving him the strength he needs to do this work is that he's part of a team that intends to prosecute these alleged war crimes. And that's a work that's very important to him and, of course, will be important to people around the world. I know that you're obviously a very contemplative person and a man with great conviction. As you see what's happening in Ukraine right now, what's catching your attention and where's your head at right now?
My head is in one particular place, and that's the 1940s. I lost a number of people. I will never even know how many when I count the cousins and the uncles and nieces and nephews. Some of them were babies because, I come from a tribe of Hungarian Jews. And in 1944, the government of a country that my ancestors were extremely patriotic to, fought in the First World War for the king. They were marked for death. There's no simple way of putting it. They were targeted in a genocide committed by the Nazi regime. Right now, you've got a Putin regime committing a genocide. Ever since I was a child, when I started reading about this and trying to figure out why my parents were a little, as a child, I just thought of them as a little, messed up, and I didn't understand things like post-traumatic stress disorder or any of those things. But reading book upon book upon book and keeping up with genocides around the world, I always believed that if in Europe, the scene of the Holocaust, you had another genocidal megalomaniac operating in broad daylight, that bastard would be taken out. So I'm sorry, I've got a mix of emotions, none of them positive, but I am angry right now with a world that does not seem bent on taking out Vladimir Putin. He will continue to commit genocide. Nobody who has ever started a genocide ever stopped until his heart was literally turned off.
How do you evaluate the leadership, the remarkable story of Vladimir Zelensky? I mean, I don't know if you've checked out. I mean, whether it's on Netflix or Prime or whatever it is, but I'm streaming. It's fascinating to see this show. I think most people have seen this show where Zelensky as an actor is playing a guy that becomes the president of Ukraine, and then he actually becomes the president of Ukraine, and is not only reasonably capable, but is, I think, has captured the attention of the world, who continues to marvel at the leadership of someone who has been thrust into an incredibly impossible decision. What do you see in him?
I see leadership in him, and when I look at Zelensky and review what he's saying and what he's writing, it really does point out to us what a vacuum we have in leadership everywhere in the world. But if I have one hope for someone who can motivate the world to do what's necessary in the case of Putin, it's Zelensky. Putin to me represents Satan, and there's only one person that I can think of right now. But I'm glad that he's alive. I'm glad that we have him. I'm glad the world has a Zelensky, because he's our one hope, our one weapon against the Satan at this moment.
We're talking to Charles Adler, the Titan of Talk. Chuck, hang tight, because I want to ask you for your assessment on the field right now, the federal Conservative Party leadership race. But first, I want to let you know that this interview is presented by our roster of sponsors that includes the remarkable team at Kubi Energy, providing solar energy solutions to power your life. I was lucky enough to spend some time with Jake and Simon from Kubi Energy over the weekend. These guys, you ask them about the projects they're doing, their eyes light up. If you want to see some of the stuff they're working on, check out kubienergy.ca and click on projects. There you can check out what they've done with power systems for both residential and commercial applications. And, of course, these home solar power systems, the examples you'll see across Western Canada, it's what you get with Kubi. They're headquartered out of Edmonton and Kamloops. Their Tesla-certified installers can be on your roof this summer. You can get your free quote today at kubienergy.ca. And if you're a partner with Kubi Energy, if you're one of their customers, you're also going to want to be taking your business over to Park Power. Why? Because Park Power has a great incentive, a solar buyback program. You can learn more on their website at parkpower.ca. That's also where you can compare rates for electricity, natural gas, and internet. And don't forget, when you take your business over to Park Power, the promo code 2022-Real Talk knocks $70 off your first bill at parkpower.ca. Our friends at Eden Landscaping are ready to bring outdoor spaces to life. This is the time of year where they're firing up those backhoes, they're dusting off the shovels. Their teams are going to be into backyards and front yards across their area. And of course, they're going to be working with a design that's been envisioned or dreamed up by you and perfected by their team that's been earning the return business and the referrals of their customers for more than 20 years. You can learn more about what they do, browse their portfolio, see the proof of their performance at landscapeedmonton.ca. And if you're one of those families that right now is doing everything you can to ensure that your loved one in an assisted living scenario, or your loved one who needs a little help with some of the everyday life kind of things, medication, food, fellowship, cleaning, laundry, socialization, all that kind of stuff, can I turn you on right now to Infinity Healthcare? Can I put that on your radar? Infinity-8.ca is where you can learn more about the services that Infinity provides to ensure that the loved ones in your family are receiving the daily supports they need from a caregiver they trust. It's all part of the personality matching service that comes with Infinity Healthcare. Our guest today, a dear friend of mine and one of the most talented talk radio personalities in North American history. He's got the Emmy to prove it. Charles Adler. I thought that you might have somebody that is tuning in today. Charles said, well, that's a bit of a casual background. You're laying low in your current retirement, although I know there's going to be a big comeback. I was expecting to, when a guy's got an Emmy, where is the Emmy? I expect the Emmy over the shoulder. I would have it right. I'd have my arm around the Emmy if I was you.
I'm not, I sometimes joke about bragging. Sometimes people don't know me think I'm a braggart, but I'm just a humble person, and I don't. I have the Emmy, but I'm not, putting it up in the shop window. And I'm hardly retired. I've got people calling on me all the time, and I'm doing business coaching and communications. But Speaking of business, if you don't mind, Ryan, indulge me for a few seconds here.
Sure.
I want to thank the energy company and the car company and the heating company and all of the other companies that are supporting the most important live communications and podcasting going on in the Western world right now. And that's this show, Real Talk with Ryan Jesperson. Yes, I'm counting on our devoted listeners and viewers, and I love them to bits, and I love them for subscribing to ryanjesperson.com. I'm a subscriber as well. But I'm really, really grateful to the sponsors, because without cash flow, there ain't no business. There ain't no Ryan Jesperson. There ain't no Real Talk. So God bless the clients, the customers, the sponsors. Thank you so much for doing what you're doing.
Well, that's amazing to hear, Charles, and I really appreciate it. And you're right, this doesn't happen without them and without the steadfast support of sponsors who know what they're signing up for. They're signing up to ensure, like you said, that there's going to be a platform for real conversations, not always popular conversations, but conversations that take us into areas where we need to go. I mean, you've had moments like that throughout your career, obviously, uncomfortable moments or moments where we have those introspective kind of I've told you this story so many times, you're probably sick of hearing it, but I'm not sure I've ever told it on air. But one of my favorite memories of listening to your show, I had just done a live broadcast out of Red Deer, as a matter of fact. We'd taken our TV show on the air, and I was lucky enough to hang out with Ron McLean, the legendary hockey broadcaster in Canada. We did a live hit together. I was on cloud nine. I went back to my hotel room and listened to you, because that was the day that the Jean Gomeshi story was breaking. And you went, and I'm certain, well, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think you scripted it. I think it was off the cuff. And for about 15 minutes, you talked about your dad, and you talked about your family's history, and you talked about your upbringing and how that shaped your perspective, not just as a person, but as a broadcaster as well. And it was captivating because it was personal. And that was a really powerful moment. Do you remember that day?
What I remember most about what motivated me was the fact that I learned that shortly before the scandal hit Ghomeshi and tore up his career, tore it to shreds, it was just shortly before then that his dad had passed. And I was happy for his dad. And I'd never in my lifetime thought that I would be happy for someone who had just died. But I died inside every moment in trying to identify with what Ghomeshi was in. I don't know how that could have happened to my life, but I always try to put myself on the other side of the screen to try to figure out what's going on in people's lives, where they really live in their hearts and in their value systems. And I was thinking, if something like that happened to me and my father was alive, it would kill him. And it would kill me to embarrass my dad and my dad's name that way. As I said earlier, I'm a proud scion of multiple generations of people who own general stores, and we're people who serve people. And that's what we do here, and that's what we're doing right now. So I remember that was going through my mind. And of course, in connecting Ghomeshi's dad and his recent demise to how I felt about my dad who had recently passed, it made me talk about my father's values and what he passed on to me, because there's no way that I would be doing what I'm doing right now. There's no way that I would be alive, and no way that I'd be motivated to be a communicator if it wasn't for being the son of one of the greatest communicators I've ever known, Mike Adler.
Charles, I want to ask you for your take on the Conservative Party of Canada, this leadership race. We can start with Erin O'Toole because I think it makes sense. It was, I guess, about the June, I think, off the top of my head, before the most recent federal election, that Mr. O'Toole, I think, tried to get ahead of the objections when it came to things like carbon pricing or what the Conservative climate plan was. You and I in 2019 sat on the Global National desk together, and this is one of the big things we talked about, how voters in Vancouver and Toronto had essentially said that they didn't think that Andrew Scheer and the Conservatives took a climate plan seriously enough. And I think Erin O'Toole was trying to bring the party a little bit more mainstream on that, was trying to get ahead of that, ultimately lost the election and lost the support of his party. So here we are. Early on, I don't want to put an opinion in your mouth, but I suspect that you may agree with me that Pierre Poilievre appears to be the front runner here. You've got Jean Charest, you've got Patrick Brown, you've got Dr. Leslyn Lewis, perhaps others set to declare. But what do you make of the campaign Mr. Poilievre is running right now? He's getting a lot of attention.
Well, there is a so-called leadership contest, but I say so-called because, if all of the play is in one end of the rink, it's not much of a contest. And It just seems that Poilievre is the only one with a real vivid campaign. He's the only one with a campaign that's drawing people. I mean, Charest's team is trying to say that it doesn't really count that Poilievre is drawing big crowds. Well, some people may buy that, but I mean, who honestly thinks that Justin Trudeau would have become a prime minister without crowds? I mean, who honestly thinks that anyone that we think of, whether it's American or Canadian, premier, other mayor. I mean, if you can't draw flies, no one's going to remember who you are. So Poilievre is drawing crowds. He's drawing enthusiastic crowds. He's drawing a lot of young crowds, and the young are no doubt feeling that the word freedom is often used, and I think the word freedom is used promiscuously because very often it's used in an incorrect sense. They're using the word freedom to make the case that someone is a dictator, and we've got a real dictator named Putin around right now. So that part offends me. But I'll put aside how I personally feel about Poilievre and the freedom versus tyranny thing that he's doing. I'll put all that aside and simply look at it squarely in the eye. Many people in this country, especially people under the age of 40, feel that their opportunities are being limited by the economic conditions of the country. And Pierre Poilievre is giving them a bogeyman, and the bogeyman is Justin Trudeau. And for people who want to buy into the idea that it's tough for them to buy a house or a car or anything else in this world, if they want to find someone to blame, Pierre Poilievre is helping them to do that. And it wouldn't be the first time in history that someone sailed into the leadership of a political party by bashing the hell out of the other party. And Pierre Poilievre, whatever else I may think about him, he's a very effective basher.
Sure. Jean Charest, I think, a shot across the bow just a couple of days ago, suggesting that Pierre Poilievre's support of the trucker convoy disqualifies him. That's the word he used. It disqualifies him from political leadership. I would suggest, and it feels like perhaps one of the most obvious things I'll say this month on this show, that I think it's a liability for the Conservative Party writ large. I think if you go into a general election leading a party as the guy who is bringing Timbits to the Ottawa Occupiers, it's a tough look and it sets you up for criticism. That said, it's going to be maybe a few years from now before Canadians vote again. Perhaps the voters' memories will be short. But do you think Jean Charest has a point? Does the support of the convoy disqualify Pierre Poilievre?
Yeah, the political problem that Jean Charest has is that you almost never win a leadership by saying, oh, by the way, my opponent who's beating the hell out of me won't do very well in a general election. I mean, that's interesting punditry, and it's not necessarily incorrect, but it just doesn't work effectively in terms of winning a leadership contest. But if you want to project down the road, whether the next election is 2 years from now or 3 years from now, yeah, the Liberal Party has a lot of so-called oppo research on Pierre Poilievre, because Pierre Poilievre has given them room service in oppo research, as you say, the Timbits to the truckers. Look, at the moment, Poilievre is too white, too right, and too convoy. And in a party that represents diversity in a country that is becoming increasingly diverse, I think that he does at the moment make it very, very easy for the Trudeau team to whip him. He doesn't make it easy for the Charest team to beat him, but he does make it easy in a general for Trudeau to beat him.
What do you make of the two other candidates that I mentioned, Patrick Brown, Dr. Leslyn Lewis? Dr. Lewis has her supporters. I don't suspect that she'll wind up winning this race, but she certainly has inserted herself into conservative political conversations over the past few years, and it's not necessarily easy to do. And then you've got Patrick Brown, leadership candidate this morning, getting people's attention. You got to do this type of stuff if you're running one of the underdog campaigns. Says he'll lift the ban on a designated terrorist organization, the Tamil Tigers. Says he'll open up immigration to any Tamil family that wants to come to Canada. Brown's got his own challenges with his leadership as well. I think that more people need to be talking about the fact that these sexual harassment allegations, I do not think, have been put to rest. A lot of people say, well, whether the girl was 19 or 18 or splitting hairs, but I suspect that that's probably going to be a liability for him moving forward once the knives really come out. What do you make of those two's chances and the campaigns they're running this for?
Well, Brown is trying to sell the memberships, and Patrick Brown has had a tremendous relationship with the South Asian community of Ontario, which is primarily why he is now the mayor of Brampton, Ontario, a hub of South Asian Canadians. So that's what Brown is doing on this business about the Tamil Tigers, because it's an ongoing issue in the Tamil community, and he wants to sign up Tamils, and he wants to sign up other South Asians, and no doubt he wants to sign up other Canadians as well. But that's that's the bet that he's making right now in this country, that he can get a diverse group of Canadians, one that doesn't look anything like Pierre Poilievre's crowd, to be competitive, and that's the card he's playing. If he's to a point where he's actually talking about sort of lifting the ban on the terrorist ban on the Tamil Tigers, to my lights, that one feels a bit desperate.
It feels very specific. Yeah. You know what I mean? I mean, if it was a promise to reevaluate how we apply this designation, or bigger picture, to have a conversation with Canadians about how we feel about unrest or terrorism or border security or international relations or something like that, maybe. But it feels strangely specific. And it feels to me like, and maybe I'm not, like, you make a good point, Chuck. You say in this certain region, he has very strong relationships with these ethnic communities, and maybe it's something specific that he needs to really put a stranglehold there on membership sales. But bigger picture, you go, like, it seems to me, it just seems a little kind of off kilter.
Yeah, well, this is just politics 101 for Patrick Brown or anyone else who's paying attention. You generally can make points with Canadians asking for certain groups to be put on a terror list. You don't make points by asking Canadians to take them off the list.
Yeah. Dr. Leslyn Lewis, check this out. I mean, she was just a pancake breakfast in Edmonton on Sunday in our home city. It looks to me to be a pretty packed house. I don't know how many people are in that gym, 300 maybe, 350, 400. I don't know. I've seen some people say there were 1,000 people at the event total. You get in trouble when you start trying to pin down specific numbers on these things. But let's just say it's more than a few that came out to hear the Member of Parliament, who I think is probably safe to say will occupy a certain spot there. I mean, with regards to the social conservatives, there'll be some overlap with her and Pierre Poilievre's supporters, of course. But what role do you see Dr. Leslyn Lewis playing? She's already earned her way into Parliament, obviously, and she's got her supporters. What does the future look like for Dr. Lewis in this party?
Look, there are a lot of social conservatives in the conservative movement, especially when it comes to leadership, because the social conservatives in general are more active. They're more generous. They give more. Their donations are higher per capita than the people who don't call themselves social conservatives. Specifically, her role politically is likely the same as it was in the last leadership contest. She will sop up a lot of social conservative vote on the first ballot, and many of those people will go to Poilievre on the second ballot. So what's her specific role? It's, I think, to be helpful to Pierre Poilievre. And I think if Poilievre does manage to form a government, Leslyn Lewis will likely have a senior cabinet role.
You think that if the vote were to go today, let's say hypothetically Pierre Poilievre wins, or let's say hypothetically Jean Charest wins, I think that those are the two realistic possibilities. And if it were today, I think that it would be Pierre that would win. Is a Pierre Poilievre or Jean Charest-led Conservative Party a party that can beat the Trudeau Liberals or the Liberals with a different leader, let's say Chrystia Freeland or someone else? Do you think that a party led by one of those two candidates could form government?
Look, even Stephen Harper, in his most candid moment, might agree with me on this. The Liberals only lose when they beat themselves. They beat themselves in the ad scam / Gomery contest that Stephen Harper ended up winning. And they beat themselves when they were foolishly making Stéphane Dion the leader. They beat themselves when they made the person I called the visiting professor, which is something the Conservatives then borrowed from me on the whole just visiting campaign. So they beat themselves with Dion. They beat themselves with Ignatieff. They did not beat themselves with Trudeau. Can Trudeau beat himself? Possibly. But Pierre Poilievre, Jean Charest, none of them win unless the Liberals beat themselves.
Charles Adler, an Emmy Award winning and RTDNA Lifetime Achievement Award winning talk radio legend, and one of my all-time favorites on a personal and a professional level. What a thrill to have you here making your Real Talk debut. This is the first of what I suspect will be many conversations. It's really nice to see your face this morning.
Well, I want to thank your viewers, your listeners, your sponsors, and your producer, and you, Ryan Jesperson, the tornado of talk. What a treat this is.
Thanks, Chuck. That's Charles Adler. What an absolute beauty. I'd tell you to go follow him on Twitter, but I suspect you probably already do. If you don't, you can find him at Charles Adler, and my thanks to him for making the time to talk to us. This is a great time to remind you that Friesen Brothers, 16 locations across the province of Alberta, huge on family. They're family-owned and operating, and for them, real good food is a top priority. They know that you're going to Friesen Brothers oftentimes because you're preparing to host around your family table. And that may include Easter celebrations this coming weekend. Easter kind of snuck up on us, hey, pal? All of a sudden, I was like, 100%. Easter weekend's coming up. What? Friesen Brothers has everything you're looking for that Easter spread. You can browse their locations online at friesen.com and learn more about their experiences, including the Butcher's Cookhouse Restaurant, the Mother Dough Bread Company, even the Flower Market. They've got you covered for Easter, and if you'd rather dine out, select Friesen Brothers locations have an amazing opportunity, and all-you-can-eat Easter feast this weekend for just $25 a person. You can browse the locations, the special locations offering that all-you-can-eat Easter feast online at friesen.com. Well, every Tuesday, courtesy of our friends at Leading Edge Physiotherapy, we take a moment or two to recognize a person, an organization, a group that is truly making an impact. Courtesy of Leading Edge Physiotherapy, we present The Leading Edge. And in this week's edition, we are proud to shine the spotlight on Bent Arrow. You may know about Bent Arrow, but if you don't, it's a traditional healing society based out of our home city of Edmonton that's aimed at providing services, much-needed resources for Indigenous children, youth, and families. It connects Indigenous people in our communities to social programs and outreach services, including employment resource centers, safe houses, early family intervention, and of course, amazing youth programs. Bent Arrow also organizes various festivals and celebrations honoring and sharing Indigenous traditions with the greater community. Now, their current project is fundraising to build a permanent sweat lodge in Edmonton. It would be the first of its kind, an innovative build as a permanent structure for Indigenous families to gather, heal, to have ceremonies, will also serve as a place for education and cultural understanding to the greater non-Indigenous community. Our friends at Leading Edge Physiotherapy pledge to match the first $5,000 donated to Bent Arrow Traditional Healing Society in this campaign. They did that in one day. And that was a huge boost as it got them to their final goal of $75,000. Bent Arrow's hoping to break ground in the spring of 2022 for this project. You can learn more at bentarrow.ca. And you can learn more about what our friends at Leading Edge are doing by checking out leadingedgephysio.com. Leading Edge Physiotherapy. Life shouldn't hurt. Coming up on tomorrow's show, we're going to have another perspective on that energy trade we were talking about today with David Knight Legg on international energy markets and Canadian roles in that. Max Fawcett, former editor of Alberta Oil magazine, will join us, a national columnist with National Observer. Plus, another former colleague of mine, a new step, Linda Steele.
Real Talk is hosted by Jesperson, technical producer John Hicks, managing director Josh Dunford, account coordinator Tanya Franklin, general manager Katie Cook-Chivers, website design Mike Johnston, voiceover by me, Carrie Skelton. Real Talk's editorial board is Supriya Dwivedi, Ahmed Ali, Ann Castleman, Corey Hogan, Harman Candola, Catherine O'Neill, and Chris Henderson. Member Emerita Julie Rohr. Real Talk is recorded in Edmonton, Alberta on Treaty 6 territory, the traditional and ancestral territory of the Cree, Dene, Blackfoot, Saulteaux, and Nakota Sioux, home to Métis settlements and the Métis Nation of Alberta. Real Talk is the flagship property of Relay Communications Group Incorporated. All rights reserved. For more, check out ryanjesperson.com.